everyone, depending on where you are. I'm Deborah McConkey, Chair of Programming for HBSWA. And I'm really excited about our talk today. We have Heather Stark, who's a fellow HBS alumna and professional certified coach. In fact, she was at HBS giving a lecture just a few weeks ago. And we had the opportunity to meet during reunion weekend. We were both having reunions, and it was wonderful to meet her in person. I also want to do a shout out to the Club of Toronto, who's co-sponsoring this, and she has spoken to that group before on this and similar topics. So Heather's the founder and president of Start Coaching with a focus on executive leadership, communication, and culture. So she works with executives to help them navigate transitions and move the organizations forward. Today's topic I'm excited about because it's leadership presence that brings out the best in yourself and others. And really, she's going to help us answer the question, how do you show up as a leader? And how do you make sure that you're using your true voice and authenticity, which is, I think, something that's important for all of us. It certainly is something that I have sometimes struggled with myself between being authentic and being professional, whatever that means. So I'm thrilled to have Heather with us today. So take it away, Heather.
Let's go back to slide. Sorry. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. And thank you, Deborah, very much for that wonderful welcome. It was lovely to meet you when I was there in the fall. So it's been a real HBS fall for me, I would have to say. A couple of visits back to Boston, which is always really fun. And now being in this group and having this discussion today. So what I thought would be interesting, since we've got different levels of understanding, different probably positions that we have in organizations, I thought it would be interesting, and something I often do, for when I do these talks, is I start the question, the discussion with a question. What does leadership presence mean to you? And you've come here because it's important to you at some level, and you want to learn about it or you want to share about it. So if you wouldn't mind, if you're feeling up to it, dropping just a word or two or three or four about what leadership presence means to you. It can be, just one word or a couple. And what I've done, just because I know we're going to have to move things, along fairly quickly today, is I'll sometimes do a poll on this, sometimes, collect, in real time the words. But what I've done instead is I thought I would share a word cloud that was made from other talks that I've done with similar groups of people, which sort of collects a number of different comments that were made about what this means to you. And as you're dropping in, if you're dropping words into the chat, please go forward and do that. But I thought I would just sort of use this as a jumping off point for us to talk. So one of the things that comes up, quite often is, it means that you have confidence. It means that you inspire self-confidence in others, collaboration, real growth mindset, authenticity, often comes up a lot. Charisma, and charisma often comes up more when I talk about executive presence. Executive presence and leadership presence are often used interchangeably. I use leadership presence because I find it to be a more inclusive terminology. But some people, think of them as the same. Other people think of them as slightly different. Commitment, communication. We'll be talking a lot about communication, building trust, likability. is another interesting thing. So there's a number of words that, have come up, and I'll just see, what's been sort of popping up in the chat. If I can see it at the same time. So authentic influence, that's a great one. Empathy, stepping up, confidence and clarity and inclusion, trust, power, confidence in self and the company, inspiring others, showing up with confidence. Confidence is coming through a lot. Um, Collaboration and leading from behind. So some really great things here. Maybe we'll make a word cloud out of what we're seeing here today. So thank you for sharing. Sorry, and my computer is not cooperating with me. There we go. Okay, so building on that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the whole concept around leadership presence. It's about continued growth. It's a continued evolution. And so even if you feel that you're sort of at your height of leadership presence, it isn't a static state. Things are going to come in, outside influences. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll actually start with going into a little bit about knowing yourself. And I'll talk about the culture of you. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And then once you have a better understanding of your values and what goes into making up you, and maybe some of you have a really strong understanding of that. Maybe others need to do a little further exploration on that. And once we go through that, then we'll talk a little bit about how that impacts showing up authentically, showing up with intention, you naming how you want to show up, and then sharing your unique voice so that you can be heard with impact. But thinking through things like context and different factors that might influence the way you share of yourself and how much you share of yourself. And I'll weave in, what I'm calling the 6 C's of leadership presence. When you go through it, there's a lot of C's that we can talk about around leadership presence. So I'll weave that in as part of a way of thinking through some words that might help anchor you as we go through this process. And we'll do a bit of a practical application exploring, in particular, one of the C's that I focus in on a lot with leaders is communication. And so leadership presence can be described in so many different ways, as we just saw. One of the ways, that I see commonly is it's the ability to connect authentically, build confidence in others, and inspire and motivate people into action. And, presence as it's, as it's defined by the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is a noteworthy quality of poise and effectiveness. And this shows up so differently for everybody. So that's why it's so important for us to not, fully focus on what it should be like, but what it is like for you and what leadership presence means for you. And this is kind of a fun, way of describing all of the different C's that go into leadership presence. And there are many more. But, really, clarity is something that comes up a lot, because when you have a clear understanding of yourself, of your purpose, you can share those things with people. That is a very key way of showing confidence. Communication, you'll see how it is interlinked and woven throughout all of the different aspects of leadership presence. It has an impact. I talk about communication a lot in terms of its role in the culture of organizations, but it also has such an important role in how you show up and how you share of yourself. It helps in the way you connect with others, the way you collaborate, your confidence. Oftentimes, charisma is another way of describing people with leadership presence. Compassion, I saw empathy coming up in the chat. And then the importance around also credibility. And it doesn't need to mean that you have to have an MBA from HBS, but it does mean that you need to come across as somebody that knows what they're talking about and that they are capable, in order to actually command some attention and authority in some situations. And sometimes that credibility doesn't just come from the words or the degree, it comes from your tone. And we'll get into that a little bit in terms of those things that can interact and impact your leadership presence. And the idea is that as we're going through this, we'll be culminating in continued growth for you and ways for you to build trust for others with you and in your organization. And there's many different ways for us to dive into this. But given the time, I thought it might be interesting to do a leadership quiz. Sometimes when I developed this originally when I was working with an organization that really wanted to kind of level set on people's leadership skills and how they were showing up in organizations. And since then, I've used it, often in these types of workshops and found it to be quite effective. And sometimes I'll send it out in advance, but today we're going to do it in real time. And I've shortened it so it's 10 questions. I'll move through it relatively quickly. You can put your hand up, through the hand signal if I'm going too fast, please. But I want to be cognizant of the timing and get through things. And as you complete each question, if you can, when you're answering it, kind of consider your strengths and also areas of growth as you're going through and answering this. I've used the scale of 1 for strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree at 5. And I'll take you through the first question in a little bit more detail so that you understand what I mean. So the first question is, I have a clear understanding of my strengths and unique skills and weaknesses as a leader. And so if you can, grab a piece of paper or tap it into your phone, whatever is the best way for you to record this. And 1, strongly disagree with this statement. 2, disagree with the statement. 3, neutral or doesn't really have an impact on you. You're not sure how to answer it. 4, agree. And 5, strongly agree. So give yourself one of those points on that scale for each of these questions as we go through. 2, I recognize my personal triggers and know how to manage my reactions in challenging situations. 3,
You want to go?
I regularly seek constructive feedback to understand how I'm perceived and improve my performance. 1 for strongly disagree, 5 for strongly agree. 4, I actively listen to others and make them feel heard. 5, I'm clear and concise when communicating my ideas and vision. 6, I consistently make decisions that align with my core values and purpose. 7, I can read and respond to the emotions of others effectively. 8, I project confidence without coming across as arrogant. 9, I am comfortable admitting when I don't know something or when I'm wrong. 10, I have a clear vision for my leadership and share it effectively with others. Now, while you're tabulating your results, I'll go through, quickly what those mean. So if you added things up and you're at 41 to 50, you have strong leadership presence and you're likely seen as confident, empathic, and a clear communicator with a strong sense of self and purpose. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you share with the group about things that work for you from that perspective. If you're in the 31 to 40, you have a solid leadership presence. You have many qualities that positively impact your presence, but you might benefit from refining a couple of areas. In the 21 to 30, moderate leadership presence, there are a few key areas for growth. And based on your responses, consider where you can focus to strengthen your impact. And then 0 to 20, there's opportunity for development around building self-awareness, improving your verbal or nonverbal communication, empathy, confidence, or a vision that could help elevate your leadership presence. So let's, now that we've done this, let's take this and apply it to a framework that I use to help foster your leadership presence. And the three elements are know yourself, show yourself, and share yourself. So as we'll start with know yourself, and we'll talk about what it means when we talk about the culture of you. Then we'll move into how you intentionally want to show up as a leader, or how you are already intentionally showing up as a leader and how you want to continue that. And then how you want to share yourself and preparing the what, the when, and how much you want to share of yourself. So we've all heard discussion, around the culture of an organization, and often a culture in an organization, there's the one you want to have, then there's the culture that actually exists in the organization, and then there's the little subcultures of different groups that exist in the organization, and friend groups and different divisions in the organization. Well, just like that happens in an organization, we each carry around our own individual culture that is impacted by many, many factors. Included in that are our values. Those are values we've probably learned at a young age, or we've been continuing to add in as we grow and develop. Priorities. Priorities are things that often change depending on life situations. Strengths and weaknesses. We have certain strengths that are our core strengths that we've had for years, we may have been born with, and others that we've developed over the years. We have weaknesses, and it's important to not just know what our strengths are, but also our weaknesses. Today, I'll do a little bit more focusing in on our strengths, because I find that oftentimes when I'm speaking with people, there is a tendency to report on weaknesses quicker and try to fix weaknesses quicker than focusing in on how to really elevate and lean into strengths. Another piece that's an important piece is energy, and helping to see what is energizing or de-energizing for you, because when you have a better understanding of that, it really does help you as you not only identify how you want to show up, but also how you want to share yourself. And then there's an element of us that's really hard, because it's hard and fantastic. It's our imprints. And when I worked at Cultural Research, we did a lot of work, and the founder of that organization talked a lot about, things that shape us that we can't really describe. And those are our imprints. Those are things that we've had for many years, maybe from something happened in our childhood or other experiences that we've collected through life. And when you can't explain, that just doesn't feel right, or this is a hard thing for me, it's often because there's an imprint that's impacting how you are. And this is part of your personal culture, and it's another piece that's important for you to understand about yourself. And I love this quote by Aristotle: knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And it is so true. Knowledge is power. Knowledge about the good, the bad, everything is power. The more you know about yourself, the more you know about your situation, is really impactful. And self-knowledge is a real competitive advantage for you. sometimes we gloss over, sometimes we gloss over weaknesses, sometimes we focus in on weaknesses, but knowing those and how you're going to use them to your advantage, how you're going to build teams, how you're going to support yourself, how you're going to lean into strengths. I often talk about an energy sandwich, how you balance off different aspects of yourself so that you have energy for different situations by doing something energizing and de-energizing before an activity that might be a little bit de-energizing for you. And when you have this understanding of yourself, it really helps provide some anchors and grounds you in who you are as a leader. And then that helps you think about how you're going to show up. And as I mentioned, this whole piece, the culture of you, yes, there's a lot internally, but there's also years of learning, experience, including failures and successes. And, what I'm hoping is that we move from fitting in to who we think or you think that others want you to be, to discovering your true voice and really leaning into that. And so when we talk about, knowing your personal culture, and we go through, there's the understanding of the imprints, the values. There's different things that you can do to help with this. One is the strengths profile of some type. I'm sure a lot of you throughout your career have done different assessments and aptitude tests, and these are all helpful pieces of information. They're self-reporting, and they're often based on a moment in time, so you have to keep that in mind as you get the data from this, but it's a point of information that can be really helpful for you. I tend to use a strengths profile that helps you understand where your strengths fit on an energy continuum from energizing to de-energizing, as a way of helping you understand what times of day are best for you, what activities require more energy, how you set yourself up so that you can show up in the best possible light and show up on your forward foot as opposed to your backward foot for things. Another thing that can be quite helpful in terms of having an understanding of yourself is a 360 assessment. Many of you will have gone through this process as well. It can be done, like in a smaller sort of number of people to a larger process. Many organizations do it, and you don't even have to go to the level of having an official one. You can also ask colleagues just for regular feedback to get an understanding of how you're showing up and what they're seeing about you. And also an understanding around how you recharge, whether you're an external or an internal recharger, how you learn, and I'm going to have a couple of slides on that, and things that might get in your way of how you might show up and any support that you might need. All these things go into really knowing yourself. And I think most people are familiar with sort of the introvert extrovert continuum. And at first it used to be kind of black and white. You either like to recharge on your own, you're quieter, or you're boisterous extrovert. And for a long time, actually, those with really strong leadership, it was thought that the louder you are, sort of the louder person in the room has a stronger presence. And that's not true at all. It's how you show up and how you use this knowledge of yourself that's important. And I've noticed a very interesting thing since, pre-COVID till now, that, even people that were very strongly extroverted, like myself, that would recharge from being in person with people, need a little bit more time on their own to recharge. Their battery isn't just charged by plugging it into others. It's now also charged by having some alone time and rest to kind of recuperate. And I think as we're, going between virtual and in-person situations, it's good for you to notice how you're recharging yourself and what you need to do now that the situation has changed. And this sort of level, this area of ambivert, describes a lot more people than it used to, because a lot of people are somewhere on this scale as opposed to just on one end or the other of this scale. So having an understanding of this is really helpful for you as well. And then, in terms of learning style and your mindset, for a lot of us, we've learned about, what this growth mindset is, that, failure is an opportunity. We can learn from it and we can grow. But in different circumstances, we might actually have a little bit more fixed mindset. So, although this is a mindset, it can be situational. So, just being aware of what you're bringing in as you're thinking and learning, and whether there's an openness or there's a little bit more closed. And this is also a great way to think about, your reports and how they're approaching their learning. It gives you an idea of style and readiness for people to learn as well as for you to learn. And because we often have a tendency to kind of focus in on things that we do a little less well, I really love the exercise of sharing a strength. When I'm in person with a group, I'll get you to turn to the person beside you and say, "Hi, my name is Heather. These are my 3 top strengths." Um, but today, we're virtual. So I'm just wondering if I would love, and this is something I'm going to talk about later. I just said something that I'm going to be sharing with you in terms of limiting language. Instead of saying, "I'm just wondering," I'm going to say, "Would you please share one strength or more, if you feel comfortable, that you feel is a strength that is meaningful to you?" And so for me, a strength that is meaningful to me is connecting. Another strength is listening. Maybe I'll take a look to see if any are popping into the chat. Sorry, I've lost my chat. Just tapped on it. Okay. Would anybody like to share a strength? Sorry, my chat has disappeared. Well,
Oh, do you want me to give you some of the things that are in here?
yeah, are there a couple of strengths that are kind of popping up? Thanks.
Yes, definitely. Um, we have empathy, um, sense of humor, which is great, calm under pressure, um, adapting and iterating,
Mm,
establishing trust quickly,
mm,
excuse me, empathetic and problem solver, and adaptability comes up again, clarity and prioritization,
mm.
and then maximizing learning, optimism, and connection.
Love that.
Optimism. I like
Love
that.
that. Huh.
I like all of these,
These
but
are awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
sure.
So now that we've done that, we've got, and this is the quick, culture view, but now that we've done that, let's go on to how you want to show yourself, what it is that you want to show, how you want to show up, how you want to be. And by doing that, we're tapping into the culture of you, what we were just discussing, your strengths, your weaknesses, your inner sources of power, and some of those great words that were just shared by Deborah and by all of you. Thank you. And then thinking through a few questions. What role do you want to play? And as I'm posing these questions, I'm largely posing them in the work, the organization setting. So what role do you want to play? And by that, do you want to be in the background or the foreground? Do you want to be seen? Because some people are really happy to be helping lift other people up, and that's okay. Leadership presence can really have an impact in terms of lifting other people up. And then there's also, being the person that is in the forefront. Which medium or mode of expression is helpful for you? Which one feels the most comfortable for you when you're showing up? Do you show up best in a virtual kind of situation, in a written media, in a podcast, in just a one-on-one situation with people, think about that, because that's going to really impact how you show up as a leader. And and then we'll go through what are some of the things that could get in your way. So it'll help us as we start to plan how you're going to share. And I'll share a few things that are things that I've seen from other leaders that may or may not be applicable to you. And then looking at, what are things that you can do to move forward. And first of all, I'll just talk about there's this concept of catering to others' interests and expectations, in altering, what we say and do to help people like us and to fit in rather than what we believe. And there's been a few studies done on this, but in this particular one, over 450 adults were asked to imagine they were about to have a really important professional interaction. And 60% of them reported that they would use a catering technique rather than simply being themselves. And by a catering technique, it means thinking about what are the words people would like to hear, what's the way they'd like me to be dressed, what's the tone that would, go over best in this. And 71% reported believing that catering would be the most effective approach to the situation. Now, as we get into the sharing of yourself, and I'm mentioning this here because as we get into the sharing of yourself, we'll see that catering can be done intentionally by thinking through these factors as to how you want to show up, or you can kind of slip into it. So, what we want to do right now is recognize some things that might be getting in your way, and then think about how you can move forward to make sure that you show up the way you want to show up in situations, and also take into consideration the context that you're in. So a few things, few topics that are topics that I encounter a lot in my coaching practice, but also when I'm doing workshops like this, are imposter syndrome, or feeling like you're not sure how you show up for a role, what's expected of you, can you meet the expectations of a role? Having a fixed mindset can sometimes get in your way, if you, especially if you sort of lock into, I can't do this, and sort of get into a cycle of I can't. That can be a very limiting thing for people. Perfectionism is another piece that can be linked to those two first pieces, and I'll talk to that in a minute. And then having the confidence to share your voice and when to share your voice, and a lack of awareness, or inputs, which is why I often recommend, as well as thinking yourself about what your personal culture is, also getting some inputs externally, and then also understanding the culture and the context that you're in. Are there any of these that resonate with any of you? Would anybody like to share a thought or a comment, or before I go into them in a little bit more detail?
Hi, Heather. I'm Claudia Molina. I'm happy to share. Imposter syndrome really resonates with me. I was working at Meta, and in fact, imposter syndrome was actually one of the courses that they taught as part of orientation or onboarding, because you're in an environment where um, there's a high level of talent. And so often I was feeling in working with engineers that I wasn't, good enough for the environment. So I could really relate to that. And in my current role, working at a startup, I'm transitioning more from being in a consultative role to being more in a sales role. And
Mm.
so as I learn these new skills, I'm constantly, have this inner conversation around with, it's not really a strength, but can I do it? And how am I showing up, and how do I acquire these skills? So yeah, imposter syndrome is something I have felt over the last several years.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And what you said there really taps into this negative thought pattern that we can get into, and that kind of that fear of not good enough, and also the shoulds. I talk a lot about, I should do this, I shouldn't do this, and kind of shoulding all over yourself, and making yourself feel less than you are. And so really, tapping into and grounding yourself and anchoring yourself in the strengths that you've identified is a really great tool, so that you know that there are strengths, and challenging that belief that you aren't enough, and so sometimes it's with a thought partner doing that, and other times just writing them down. What are the things that you're telling yourself, and then challenging each one of those things. And sometimes it's also like, I have to learn this, or I have to be as good as the engineers, or I have to learn this whole new role. And sometimes chunking out what you need to do in a new role is something that can be a really helpful strategy to help it feel like you're building a pathway, as opposed to you're looking at a huge mountain that feels very difficult to climb. So maybe, giving yourself some check marks, like, today I planned how I'm going to get to the base camp, or today I planned how to this route, and I found a stream. And, so you can sort of check off the things that you've done, as opposed to the things you haven't done, because we often get focused in on that. And, sometimes in a situation like that, as you mentioned, it sounds like Meta, like, sort of addresses, there might not be role models for you in that, for you to see how you navigate. And so maybe sometimes thinking outside of the situation you're in for mentors and role models to kind of help you through that. And a strategy that I will often use even with clients is to actually feel the fear, because fear can be something that completely paralyzes, or it can galvanize you. So feel the fear, name it, and say what you want to say. This is for yourself. This is an exercise for yourself. It makes me feel very nervous to say this, but I believe that I am great in this role, or but I believe that I am able to do X. And so having some statements that recognize that there's fear, because if you brush it off, then you just still continue to feel it. But by actually recognizing it, you're actually leaning into that and moving forward. And, related to this is something that I call paralysis by perfection. And oftentimes perfectionists have a bigger tendency to experience imposter syndrome, is what I've found. I don't have any actual empirical data on this, but this is something that I have found in my practice. And perfectionism also often leads to procrastination, or a kind of paralysis to move. And so sometimes, I think it's really important to think about how you counterbalance that. And again, feeling the discomfort, moving through the discomfort in similar ways to what you would do with imposter syndrome. And that awareness can help us move forward with some intentionality. And that's the key, is to identify things that are getting in your way. And I have a few techniques that you can just use if you're sort of stuck and you need to get moving. There's the Pomodoro technique, where you decide that you're going to work for a certain amount of time, set a timer, and then have a break just so you can get started. And then another technique that I use if we're really feeling stuck, especially if we're feeling, that we're not good enough in a situation, and that's part of what's driving our procrastination and our feeling of paralysis, is just saying, like, you know what, I'm going to do as much on this as I can for 5 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to set myself up, and then I'm going to count down. And you count down and you go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you go, just like I go into this. And I lead into this slide right now because something that happens in terms of confidence, and this may not ring true for everybody, but I have to put my glasses on to see the writing on this, but I found this really interesting because there is a real difficulty for a lot of women who have difficulty expressing their strengths or talking about themselves in a room full of strangers. And so this survey was done, what would you rather do than, talk about yourself in a room of strangers? And 47% said, I'd rather run errands in the rain than talk about myself. 42% would rather clean the bathroom, and 43% would rather give up a week on social media. And I share this because this might ring true for some of you, but if it doesn't, it might ring true for some people that are reporting into you. And just remembering this, that having the confidence and, you know, the ability to share yourself with other people can be really challenging for a lot of people. And so what I want to do is, rather than I introduced you to 6 different, facets of leadership presence. But rather than focusing in on all of them, because as I look at the time, it's going by fast as it always does, I want to focus in a little bit on communication and just share a few things with you that I think might be helpful, because it's foundational, and I'm biased because I do a lot of work on communication. It's a lot of my background and a lot of what I focus in on, but it's foundational for how you connect with people, how you collaborate, how you show compassion, how you build trust. And the whole act of listening with the intent to hear and sharing some verbal and nonverbal cues to show that you're listening is so very important. And I share this diagram a lot because we spend a lot of time on making nice slides, thinking about what we're going to say. And really, for people, when they're absorbing a message, when you're absorbing my message right now, in addition to the words I'm saying, you're going to be listening for what you're hearing me. What's my tone? Is there a little bit of fluidity to it? Am I flat? Am I excited? And what you see, am I expressive? Is my face expressive? Am I using my hands a lot? Am I sitting up with a posture that, shows that I'm engaged? And all of these things go into an understanding. And so when we're thinking about how we show up as a leader, being cognizant of all of these pieces of what we communicate with our nonverbal as well as our verbal communication is incredibly important. All the way from, how we stand, if we're standing, to how we sit. I often recommend, if we're sitting in these, for presenting, I always have my feet flat on the ground. I start off with my shoulders up and back and down, as a way of putting yourself forward and looking like you're on your forward foot, as opposed to slumped down and then having to join the meeting. If you're already in the meeting, you look much more commanding. You have a stronger presence. Thinking about what you're going to do with your hands, how your resting face posture looks, whether you upturn or downturn your face, how you engage with the camera in these virtual situations. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on voice, tone, tenor, and also the words that you use. And so when we talk about language, clear, inclusive language, that builds trust. It demonstrates authenticity. It's one of the pieces that goes into the C of credibility. When you have clear statements and you say them with confidence, that conveys authority. And a trap that I often see, and I talk about this a lot, is that you can make a statement like, I feel very confident. I feel very confident. If your voice turns up at the end of that language, that is confident language, but you turn up with a question mark at the end of it, you sound less confident. Hedging phrases, which can diminish, perceived confidence and clarity. Passive language, apologies, being overly complex in what you say. All of these things can have an impact. And so I'm going to quickly go through a couple of language replacements that I've seen a lot in terms of hedging language instead of I think we should. It's just an idea where you're kind of diminishing what you're saying. I recommend we. Limit unnecessary apologies. Sorry to bother you. Now, that's hard for me because Canadians say, instead of pardon me, we say sorry. So I must say sorry about 50 times a day. But try not to say things like sorry to bother you, or this might be wrong, but, and instead just dive into what you want to say. And then replace that passive language with more assertive language, like instead of it would be nice, let's move forward with.
Mhm.
And so a steady, calm, and clear tone conveys confidence and authority.
6,
When you use, sorry, I think somebody's off mute.
6.
When you use a warm tone, or you're rated as being higher in trustworthiness and approachability. A positive tone also can often, cause a little bit more motivation and engagement. And then matching the tone with the message can be very, very important. And so the whole piece, where I just said the turn up at the end of a voice, um, that can cause a bit of incongruence where people are like, she's saying one thing, but she really doesn't sound confident. So really being cognizant of these things can be very helpful. And something that I share a lot in terms of, us as leaders, and something that we can use as sort of a visual reminder is, engaged and empathic listening is really almost like, turning a light bulb on. And so when you're showing that you're present for people and listening to them, it's almost like you're saying, yep, I'm going to do it. And this is how I'm going to share myself. And so I'll go through this really quickly to make sure that we don't run out of time, and then I'll leave a few minutes for questions. So as you're preparing to share yourself, what I'd like you to be thinking about is, which aspects do you want to share? And what aspects of yourself do you want to keep just for yourself? And this is usually really influenced by understanding the context and situational factors. Some people say, do I have to have a work persona and an individual persona? No, there's threads that you want to take through. There's anchors. There's what you want to take through and what you've decided you want to show. But thinking through what channel you want to show yourself with, how you want to plan for impact moments, how you want to prepare to be present. These are all things that are important. These will be individual to you. And it's going to be really important for you as you're thinking about big moments that are coming up for you, or even one. A lot of people, as managers, sort of don't leave time between one-on-ones. It's one of the most important meetings you can have as a manager, and making sure that you've got some buffer booking around meetings so that you can shed distractions and you can come in and fully focus and be yourself and share yourself is a very, very important piece of this. And so as you're planning, for meetings and interactions, think through the context. Something that a lot of people find, helpful if you're thinking about how you're going to share yourself is maybe testing it out in a pre-meeting, floating your ideas prior to big meetings to get consensus before you go into big meetings. Using your voice, knowing what you're going to say is much easier when you've prepared what you're going to say and when you've practiced it out loud. And I always suggest that even if you write out a big long thing that you're going to say, or if you've got a big meeting coming up and you've got some key points, have those anchors to keep you focused. Use them to keep you and help you moving forward. And a lot of people ask me, is it fully possible to be yourself in the work context? And that's a question you've got to answer for yourself, and it will really depend on what your work context is. And so sometimes there's conflicting signals that you're dealing with, where you're told to show up as your whole self, be you, not too much of you, virtual, hybrid. It's hard to really fully share of yourself all the time. So these are all factors that are really important for you to think about as you prepare to show up. Your context, what your organization is, and how you can be your true self in an organization. And the way that you can most likely do this is to be in an organization that aligns with your values. That's not always possible, but if you can, it's really important to kind of learn about what kind of organization you're getting into. First of all, knowing what your personal culture is, how you're going to be able to share of yourself when you're in that organization. And before I take some questions, I'll just touch on this point here, which is we talked a lot about ourself here and how you can show up as a leader and share yourself, your leadership presence. How can you support your colleagues? How can you support your team? What does that look like in meetings for you? How can you help set others up for success? Thinking about these aspects are all really, really important. There's many different techniques, like the amplification technique in a meeting, where if a woman or a person that tends to be quieter in a meeting says something, building on that point, naming their name, and then helping that comment get amplified. Shine theory, recognizing and helping build other, it's often, talked about in terms of women, but also with people that are a little bit quieter in the organization to help them share of themselves. These are all different tactics that we can use. And I wanted to throw it out here now for questions, comments, and just have there been things popping up in the chat that I haven't seen, Deborah, that would be great to address at this moment?
So far, no questions because we didn't ask people to put questions in. We have comments that people have made in terms of things like culture and how that's critical to how we reveal ourselves.
Okay. So perhaps,
But so please, you can put your questions in the chat, or you can use the hand raising technique. Um, and I would also mention earlier when we were talking about the imposter syndrome, um, I forgot what famous person said, no one can make you feel bad unless you allow them to, something to that. But yet, we have found ourselves in situations where there's just people trying to put you down and trying to negate for their own purposes, or maybe because they're insecure. And I'd like you to just mention, say something around that when you're in situations where people are kind of trying to dismiss you or tear you down, to, you know, have you feel that you're less than or not good enough.
yeah, and that's a really good point. It's a lot of the reason why, people came up with these things like the shine theory and the amplification technique. And, rooting yourself in your anchors as to what your strengths are and what you bring to a situation is extremely important. Sometimes you're in an environment where it is toxic and it's maybe just not the right environment for you. So you need to think about that. It's not always possible for us just to leave a situation because we don't like it, but it is important for you to be thinking about, is this the context? Is this the right situation for me? Very important. But also, how do you show up? So you would lean into what your strengths are. Let it, as you mentioned earlier, not tear you down, but lean into what you know is true of yourself. And sometimes even, I have clients that have sticky notes on their computer to remind themselves if they're going into a tough situation, you know, I am, and the things that they do, I can, and reminding themselves of this. And the other thing you can do is you can actually address it with the person as well if you feel comfortable, and frame the discussion around how you feel, and if there are things that you can do to help move forward with this relationship in a different way, because sometimes having a conversation is the best way to do it. But leaning in and feeling grounded in who you are is always going to be sort of your North Star that'll help you have 2 feet on the ground. And preparing for high pressure moments and knowing what your stress reaction is, like if it's going to set you off, taking a deep breath before you go into those conversations, maybe doing a power pose. I didn't even talk about that, but I'm telling you, I did my power poses before starting today. And this is my power pose before I go into meetings like this. But also taking a deep breath so that you're not put fully on your back foot, but you can step into the situation owning who you are.
Thank you so much. There's a couple of questions here. One, are any additional leadership books that you like to recommend to us. But there's one here, Andreas asked, can you comment on gender differences that you observe in your practice and what works for women specifically?
Yeah. So in terms of books, I'm a big Brene Brown fan. I really enjoy her. I leaned into a little bit of Amy Cuddy here. You didn't see it fully coming out. I read a lot of Harvard Business Review. I find it be really helpful with some really insightful articles. I tend to read a lot more articles and recommend articles over books sometimes just because they're faster, get information a little bit more clearly and quicker out to people. And then in terms of gender difference, yes, I notice a large difference, and I work with a variety from, very fully established organizations that are quite hierarchical, all the way through to startups and some fairly male dominated industries. And there definitely is a gender difference, and there is a difference in perception in terms of the way people are seen in an organization and the way we feel we need to show up sometimes. I will get comments like from very senior people where I feel like I'm the inside boss as opposed to the outside boss for my male counterpart, where I'm taking care of more of the administrative stuff, or somehow I'm note taking even though I'm leading a meeting. And sometimes we play into this as well, but there are still some biases that exist internally and externally, and there are some industries where it's more pronounced than others. And I had some interesting conversations at the reunion with people that graduated in 1979, 8% of the HBS class. And listening to what they did in terms of the way they altered their voice, the way they showed up. And we've come a long way, but we still have a ways to go. So that's why rooting yourself and being able to lean into what is you at the core, what's your culture, is really important, because things are going to come around that destabilize us, and even our own values that we have in terms of how we're going to share of ourselves and how we're going to show up are going to come in, and they're going to impact us in ways that we don't even realize, and others as well. So, in short, yes, I notice a difference. And that was a longer answer, and I could go on for this because it's something I'm quite passionate about, and why I do a lot of work with women to help build their confidence, to help with leadership presence, to help facing pressure head on, because I feel like there are definitely gender differences in that.
Thank you so much. Wow, this went by so quickly. I could come up with 10 more questions of my own as well. Um, so thank you very much for this. One question, someone had asked if you were going to share the slides with us or not.
I don't generally share the slides, but I believe that it's going to be recorded, right? So
Okay.
that will go on the website, I believe.
Yes, it'll be recorded and it has been recorded and it'll be available afterwards.
And if
But
people have
thank you.
specific things that they would like, to reach out to me for, got my contact information here. Feel free to reach out to
Yes,
me on LinkedIn or here. Yeah.
good. Thank you for putting that here. So thank you again. This was really informative. And as I said, we could easily have this discussion over a couple of hours. But I'm so thrilled that you came and that we were able to learn from you a lot of great things and things for us to think about too. And I loved being able to take a quiz and things that I hadn't thought about for a long time, like, I think are wonderful because they're great takeaways for us. So
Good.
thanks everyone for coming, and please check your emails. We've got lots of great events coming up over the next few weeks. So I look forward to seeing you at some other events. And again, thank you, Heather. We
Thank you very much,
appreciate
Deborah.
your
Thank you to
time.
everybody that put this forward. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you everybody for your time and energy.
Take care.
Thank you.